Gender politics in Japan are dicey. Let me be clear up front, I am by no means an expert on the subject, and you should absolutely take everything I say with a grain of salt and do your own research, etc., but still, I feel it's important to establish at least a little bit of cultural context for the subject of this video. Whether it be politically or socially, women in Japan don't exactly have the easiest time of it. As recently as this damn year, in the World Economic Forum's latest Global Gender Gap Report, Japan was rated 147th in women's political empowerment out of 156 countries and 120th overall. Oh my god, it's been a while since I wrote this. That's terrible! That's behind Saudi Arabia. What the fuck? Sorry, went off script there. I have had just a day of it. Anyway, alright, back on script. Women have long had a presence in Japanese social activism, but they're still lacking in political representation in the year of our Lord 2021, and that sucks. On the social side of things, there's an old school of thought which is sadly arguably still alive today, though to what degree is beyond my ability to speculate. I'm referring to what's known as Ryosai Kenbo, wherein the role of the ideal Japanese woman is seen as good wife, wise mother, and wherein women are grossly subservient to men. The history and particulars of Ryosai Kenbo are beyond the scope of this video. Again, I invite you to research the subject, see the description for references, but suffice to say, it's an ideology wherein women are subservient to men, which is arguably still felt today. Hell, I would say inarguably. One of the facets of Ryosai Kenbo is that raising and educating children is the mother's domain, in which the father hardly has any role. As recently as 2019, a Japanese official was quoted as echoing that very sentiment, quote, "We speak of cool ideas such as gender, equal society, and men's child rearing, but they are unwelcome ideas for children."
Everything about that statement is wrong.
All of this is to say that sexism is very much alive in Japan, both on the political and social fronts, and god, that's not even mentioning all the manga and anime that sells exclusively on the premise of women being objects, like holy shit! Hopefully none of this comes as any shock to you, but there's one more manifestation of Japanese sexism that is particularly why is that word so hard to say? Particularly. There's one more manifestation of Japanese sexism that is particularly relevant to this video. I'm talking at the institutional level. Women's roles in the workforce, things like that. There's problems there too. Wage gaps, of course, disparities in management with women being given fewer opportunities to advance due to the cultural perceptions we've already discussed, like, oh, they're just gonna start a family and quit, no point in promoting them. There's apparently some perception that women have to make a choice between being single with a career and starting a family without a career, and obviously those two things shouldn't be seen as mutually exclusive. There's one particular scandal of intentional disenfranchisement which highlights all of this, one which is particularly relevant to us. In 2018, it was reported that Tokyo Medical University had, quote, been systematically blocking female applicants from entering the school for at least 8 years. This was done by universally lowering the entrance exam scores of all female applicants, meaning that qualified women were artificially excluded from attending the school in favor of less qualified male candidates. And why, pray tell, did the school do that? No prizes for guessing. Quote, according to an unnamed source, the school thought female students would eventually leave the medical profession to give birth and raise their children. In other words, the school officials were biased and sexist pieces of shit. They let their actions be tainted by an unambiguously sexist belief, that old Ryosai Kenbo thought rearing its head. Now, after that scandal was exposed, it's important to note that school did walk back that sexist policy and even offered admission to some qualified students who were wrongfully denied entry. In response to the whole scandal, one Japanese teacher wrote in an op-ed, "We should really take a long, hard look at how unfair this score fraud is to female students, just as the corporate quit-upon marriage and gender-based retirement age systems of yore were." In other words, even within Japan, that scandal was recognized as being the result of outdated ideas of gender roles and norms seeping their way into the decision-making processes of institutions and businesses. However, it's worrying that this scandal only surfaced as recently as it did. Again, this was the year of our Lord 2018. You'd think tactics like those would have died out at least half a century ago. If that scandal hadn't been brought into public view and sparked backlash, who's to say whether it would have continued? Regardless, the fact that it did happen and continued to happen until relatively recently, in just that one institution, mind you, is indicative of ongoing larger problems and trends with sociocultural perceptions of gender roles within Japan. After all, if it was happening there, who's to say something like it isn't still happening elsewhere? Enter Anako Kaeruda. Kaeruda is a Japanese author who has published several short stories, serialized web novels, and light novels. Apparently, she mostly does yuri, and you know what? Good for her. Good for her. More importantly for us, being a human being who is alive and aware of the things around them, the Tokyo Medical University admissions scandal naturally came to her attention. Quote, "When I heard the news, I was shocked that not only were women unfairly barred from their life's adventure, but that there are so many people who will just write off the discrimination as a fact of life that can't be changed." So in response to the scandal, being a writer, what did she do? That's right, she wrote. Not long after she put out a light novel series wherein girls get pissed the fuck off and beat up the CEO of sexism. That's how the subject of today's video came to be. Dear viewers, this is Sexiled. My sexist party leader kicked me out, so I teamed up with a mythical sorceress. For those unaware, which given the popularity of this thing on my anime list is probably most of you, here's a quick rundown of the story of this light novel duology. Yeah, that's pretty much it. But in all seriousness, just to make sure that we're all up to speed, given, that, here's an actual brief synopsis. In a fantasy world that runs on light RPG mechanics that actually isn't a video game and just a fantasy world, Tanya is a talented mage going on adventures with a supposed childhood friend and a party of dudes, when one day the friend calls a group meeting and, with the agreement of the rest of the party, fires Tanya because she's a woman, with the objectively awful reasoning that she's around that age where she should be looking to settle down and start a family, and he frames it like he's doing her a favor, giving her an opportunity to find a man. Tanya, rightfully pissed, runs off into an empty field at the foot of a mountain range and casts extremely powerful explosion magic all over the place while screaming fuck. In so doing, she accidentally sets free a sorceress named Lapis, who had been imprisoned there for 300 years for, crime. Tanya, having decided that she's fucking done putting up with all the sexist bullshit in her life, decides to team up with this mythical being and sets out to get some sweet, sweet revenge. Spoilers, revenge is had. And of course, along the way, Tanya and Lapis will help and team up with other wronged women and confront sexist injustices in their various forms as they crop up. In sum, and I've just got to highlight this quote from the back of the book because it is excellent, it's time to kick ass, kiss girls, and dismantle the patriarchy. So that's the basic gist of it, and honestly, if you aren't already fully on board or at least intrigued, I don't think we can be friends. As might be obvious by now, I was enamored by this light novel duology despite any number of shortcomings which we'll touch on later, and I guess you could chalk up my fascination with these books to a few key factors. One is the excellent translation job by Molly Lee and editor Hannah Carter, and how they didn't shy away from language that perfectly reflected the extremeness of, everything within these stories, and how they otherwise managed to give us breezy prose that made for a fun and engaging read. Look, what I'm trying to say is, my 12-year-old brain did endless giggles because they used fuck a lot, and I appreciated that, so thank you, Lee and Carter, you done did good. But more importantly, what I was really surprised and hooked by with these two light novels was their refreshing honesty and, for lack of a better term, bluntness. The deeper you get into these Chinese cartoons and comics and other media and what have you, the more it becomes apparent how uncomfortably male-centric much of it is. Not all, mind you, but an uncomfortable amount. If any given one of the more popular and visible stories that tend to make their way stateside isn't directly exploiting the bodies of its female characters for cheap and often gross, air quotes, sex appeal, then their female characters are often sidelined and made to suffer from microaggressions based on no other apparent reason other than their sex. And what's especially frustrating about all of that is that these narratives will never acknowledge what they're doing. They won't outright say that women should get in the kitchen or whatever, but these narrative trends will still reflect underlying disempowering sexist beliefs, and by not recognizing and addressing these shortcomings, these stories thereby uncritically present as normal the microaggressions they do commit. It's this being so unself-critical that really irks me so. It's not just that these female characters are sidelined, it's that they're sidelined and then the narrative pretends that that isn't a problem. And to be clear, I'm not saying you can't find media that bucks this trend, because you absolutely can. Look at me, I'm that AniTuber best known for talking about pretty cure and magical girls. Lately, I've been getting into a lot of manga where women take center stage, but I think it's telling that for a lot of that I had to go digging. So all of that stuff tends to bother me a lot, if you couldn't tell. So imagine my elation when Sexiled came right out and said, fuck all of that. Oh yeah, I was all like, yes, queen. I just said that out loud. Sexiled is explicitly centered on rebuking various manifestations of sexism in all walks of life. Unlike a lot of narratives in the media landscape it exists in, it does not shy away from these ugly truths or pretend that they don't exist, instead choosing to shine a light right on them. It doesn't hide behind half-baked metaphors or pretend these problems are anything other than what they are. It sees sexist bullshit, it calls it out, and then it punches it in the face. And I fucking love it just for that alone, for not being afraid to just be about these issues that other media are seemingly too hesitant to discuss, for its willingness to indulge in the fantasy of stamping this shit out wherever it occurs. And it does that a lot. Throughout the 2 volumes, Sexiled tackles, or at least touches on, so many types of sexism, on the individual and micro level, ingrained cultural beliefs, institutional actions, all sorts of shit. Individual men raised in a society that teaches them that they are superior will enact various microaggressions against the women around them, such as one guy in Volume 2 groping a young girl and having no one care, or Tanya's supposed friend kicking her out of the party in Volume 1. On a cultural level, women adventurers, in a jab at RPG and MMO conventions, are forced to wear bikini armor, while all the men get to wear, actual armor. They are raised to believe that the bikini armor is actually beneficial to them somehow, but the reality turns out to be that its purpose is just to give men eye candy and to pressure women into retiring from adventuring early. And on the institutional level, the prime example is lifted straight from real life. A mage school in Volume 1 is found to be pulling the exact stunt that Tokyo Med was caught doing, that being lowering female applicants' scores so as to admit fewer of them. And given all the manifestations of sexism in its fantasy setting, how does Sexiled aim to tackle said sexism? As this is a fantasy light novel, it's only appropriate that it does so through a power fantasy. A fantasy that is inarguably a staple of the medium, and often only the domain of men. So, even I, the person who doesn't read light novels, thanks to all of those anime adaptations, can easily point to example after example of light novels in sci-fi fantasy settings wherein a male protagonist is, for some reason or another, overpowered, and then as a result has a bunch of girls pining after his dick. It's practically a genre to itself, and Sexiled here's all like, wait, why can't girls do that too? So, it does that. Now, this does open a realm of discussion regarding the gendering of fantasies, the values they reflect, whether simply inverting gender within a gendered fantasy is in fact empowering, or rather limiting either gender to one's definition of a power fantasy, but that's honestly way beyond me. Read Earthsea if you want a more nuanced take on women finding power and meaning in a men's world without relying on men's ideas about what makes one powerful. But for our purposes, as far as Sexiled is concerned, if boys are allowed to find comfort in fantasies about being literally powerful, then darn it, girls should be allowed to indulge in that fantasy too. So that's what it does. The story grants Tanya extreme power and lets her go to town. And you know what? That is just fine. For one, Tanya's earned it. She's put in an awful lot of work to get where she is at the start of the story, itself a powerful state. despite being looked down upon and degraded throughout her entire journey to get it. If you've ever lost interest in a narrative because an overpowered protagonist either made things boring or were boring themselves, fear not, because Sexiled just does not have these problems. As I've already said, Tanya herself isn't boring because of all the injustices she's faced, really driving up that sympathy factor, but also, her being overpowered doesn't make the story beats dull or uninteresting either. Sure, it's beyond question that she's going to come out on top, but that's okay because the more pressing narrative issues are how exactly she's using her powers and for what purpose. Sure, you know that when she faces off against her ex-friend at the end of Volume 1, she's going to kick the absolute shit out of him, but you don't care about that. You care about, A, you absolutely want to see it happen because he deserves it, and B, just what manner she's going to go about making an absolute clown of him. So that's the fantasy. What if you were so strong you could just clown all over the sexists and be a force for positive social change? And as far as fantasies go, that's a pretty pleasant one to indulge in. And it's perhaps a damning condemnation of the state of gender equality in our own world that one might feel the need to resort to a power fantasy to feel they can overcome it, but oh no. I don't have a butt for that. That's just depressing to think about. No, I do have a butt for that. Because it's not the job of fantasies to be real, right? That's why it's a fantasy. It certainly incorporates real-world injustices, that's for sure, but it's not the job of these books to be instructional on how to overcome them. Rather, it's their job to inspire, and whether or not they're very successful at that is up to the individual. But it is at least a stated goal worth believing in, an ideal worth aspiring to. At the end of Volume 1, having clowned all over the big sexist in her life in a big tournament full of spectators, Tanya gives the crowd a big, inspiring, girl power speech that, while possibly corny, can't help but be read as an earnest declaration from the author. We need to stop holding ourselves back because we're female, or because we're a certain age, or because our skin is a certain color. Your big adventure is still out there. Don't let anything or anyone keep you down. And to all the little girls out there who dream of adventure, this victory is for you. Deride it as naive and simplistic if you must, but honestly, I find it hard to fault the books for being so honest and earnest in their intent. If all the author desires is to inspire girls to be their best selves, then honestly, good on her. Regardless of the execution, that's a noble goal that I absolutely cannot fault. Speaking of execution, now that we've discussed most of what tickled my fancy about these books, I must back up and clarify something. I'm not trying to argue that these books are masterpieces of literature or anything, nor that they're perfect and beyond ridicule. There's plenty you could nitpick about these books if you wanted to, and a few larger issues besides that might warrant discussion. These books are in many ways clumsy. The writing, while easily digestible, isn't much for detail. It's quite dialogue-driven, and the reader is often left to their own devices to fill in setting details that are left unconveyed. Structurally, some conflicts are resolved almost as soon as they're introduced, and while these novels do have lofty ambitions in tackling real-world issues of sexism, some of said issues they just don't know what to do with. Like, one part in Volume 2 brings up the issue of, despite the stereotypical view of the kitchen as the woman's domain, the realm of chefs and professional cooking is still male-dominated and made hard for women to succeed in. This is a very real issue that most certainly warrants exploration, but aside from bringing it up, the volume just doesn't do anything with this premise, which then begs the question of why bring it up to begin with if it isn't structurally going to contribute anything to the wider narrative. In other words, the idea is sound, but the execution is lacking. And if I wanted to nitpick other things, I absolutely could, but I don't want to get caught up in the pedantic. It's only fair of me to note that these books are indeed clumsy, but on that same token, I must also mention that for the most part, I really don't care. Clumsy though these books may be, I still thoroughly enjoyed them. Their honesty and even bluntness in tackling real-world issues, even through a fantastical power fantasy, was refreshing. The writing was generally good enough to be engaging, and any complaints I may have are rather minuscule in the grand scheme of things. I'm not trying to put forth these books as lost masterpieces or anything, but I, for one, am glad to have read them. Put simply, if you've ever been annoyed by any sexist bullshit in any media ever, then these books, for you, will be pure catharsis. Also, Tanya and Lapis are hella gay, so this counts as my Pride Month video. Thanks for sitting through my rambling about a couple of light novels. Let me know what you thought in the comments below, and I absolutely promise the next video is precure, and that's it. Thanks again for watching, and don't forget to be gay and do crimes. Happy Pride Month.